Hi, so we're going to create Windows IIS, which is Internet Information Services web server in Azure. So let's see how to do that. So there are basically two ways to create the IIS web server. The first way is through PowerShell, which is what we are going to do now, and the second way is through the portal, which we are also going to do in this video. So let's go on with PowerShell. So click on the Cloud Shell. We're going to go back to our notes, and we can see that first of all we need to create our credential, so that we'll be asked for the credential and we'll give our username and password, and then we'll run immediately the Azure command, which is to create a new Azure VM. And this time we're going to use the resource group name as RGLab09, and we'll create the name of the virtual machine, which will be the web server, as VMLab09. And let me just add one more thing here, and I'll say 01 because we are going to create our second web server through the portal. Then the location we're going to have is East US, then virtual network name, my VNet, subnet name, my subnet, security group name, my network security group, public IP address name, my public IP address, the open port, which HTTP port 80, and we'll now pass in the credentials which we set up in the beginning. Then after that, we are going to set, because we want to install the IIS software. So we're going to set the Azure VM, and we'll include an extension, and we'll put that in the resource group RGLab09, and the extension is IIS. Now virtual machine name, we have to change this to 01, so VMLab0901, and the location is still East US. The publisher we're going to get from Microsoft Compute, and the extension type is custom script extension, and we're using type handler version of 1.10, and we'll create the string, which is the setting, and it says command to execute PowerShell add Windows feature, the web server, PowerShell add content part, and this is where our IIS file will be saved. And at the end of the day, we would have the value. That's what's going to be the default content in the virtual machine, and that's the web server content, and in the HTTP file we're going to have the computer name. So we're going to change that once we've done that. Then afterwards we can get the IP address and display the website. So first of all, let's copy this to create the credentials and to create the virtual machine. So copy that, we'll come back, and here we'll paste, and now it asks for the credential. So I'm going to get my username, which is Azure admin, and I'll paste that and enter, and now it asks for the user password. So I'll just copy this, which is going to be our password, come here, and I'll paste that and enter, and now it wants us to create the virtual machine. So I'll press enter. It says no size value has been provided, so it will create the default size standard D2S version 3, which is okay because we are using the Windows web server we want to create, and it's always better you have 2 or more cores in the virtual machine. That's why we won't be using the B1S in this case. So let's give time for the virtual machine to be created so that we can now install the IIS extension. And now we can see the virtual machine has been created, because we can see that we have the information here and the provisioning state says succeeded. So let's run the command to see the virtual machines that we have available. So we'll say get, and we can just include the format table. And now we can see that our resource group with the virtual machine 01 has been created, the size, and it says succeeded. So now let's run the second command to install the extension in our virtual machine. So we will come down here and say set the extension. So copy all that, copy, and come down here and paste that command and enter. So we'll just give it some time so that it can install the Internet Information Services software to our Azure virtual machine, so that we can convert the virtual machine to a web server running Windows IIS. And let's take a look what's going on. Let me just minimize this. Let me minimize that completely. We'll go to virtual machines and we can see our virtual machine. So it's currently running, and let's just go to networking and we can see inbound port rule for HTTP has been created. So we can have access to the virtual machine, and extension we can see is installing, transitioning, installing our extension IIS. To the size, let's go to size, and this is what we have with 2 cores, and we didn't use B1S because we prefer this. We can also resize, but not advised. Bring back the PowerShell, and now we can see it is true. Our IIS web server has fully been deployed. So we can either use the IP address we have here. Go back to networking. So we can use this IP address, or we can come and find that out from here. So we're going to run this command, that is to get the Azure public address on the system using the resource group name, and the name is my public IP address, and we'll select the IP address. So we're going to copy that, copy, and we'll come back to run it here, paste, and enter. And now we have the IP address, which is what we have in the portal. So I'm going to copy that, come back here and paste that, and we can see now the name of the virtual machine which has been created. That's the VM Lab 0901, and we're going to go into the web server and we're going to change the content there, and it's in the inetpub www root or .htm, or this we can as well change the content in there instead of removing that, and we'll just say this is this web server. Let's go back, and to do that we have to connect through RDP. So I'll minimize that. So we'll have to create, first of all, we create the inbound port rule for RDP to permit RDP. So I'm going to use the custom RDP, and we can see the port is 3389, and it's TCP action allow priority fine, and we'll just call this and we'll add, and now we have it here, RDP allow. And next we need to connect. So we'll connect to the virtual machine using RDP, and we can see it says to reconnect. To connect to your virtual machine via RDP, select an IP address, optionally change the port number, and download the RDP file. So we'll select the IP address, which we have here, and the port number, we can leave that, and we'll download RDP file and say OK. So it's downloaded the file. So we'll go there, and since we already have the RDP software on our Windows system, we can see it has already detected it as the remote desktop connection. So I'll just double click on that and I'll connect. And now it asks for the password, but I'm not going to use this my account, because remember we created a username and a password here. So instead I'll use this username and that password. So I'll copy the username, more choices, use a different account, and I'll paste that. And the password we're going to use is this password, which we have here. Copy that, and oops, and we'll come back and paste the password, and okay, that's fine. So it will create the connection. So I'll say yes, connect, and we should have access to the virtual machine shortly. And now we can see that the Windows web server has already been set up and is ready to be used. And now we can see server manager coming up. So we wouldn't make any changes in the server manager dashboard. We just need to basically access. We can see the virtual machine that we created. We can also see IIS that has also been deployed. So let me minimize that, and let me go to the folder which I specified. If you come here, we can see it here. That's the C in inetpub www-root, and we'll look for the default HTML file. So we would go to this PC, and we can see the inetpub and the www-root, and this is what we're looking for, HTML document. So I can change the contents on that. So I'm going to open with Notepad, and we can see what was displayed. That's the name of the web server. So I'm going to change this and say we'll save that and close it. And once that is done, I'll expect the change to be made. If we come back to our main computer, our host computer, and let's refresh, and we can see now it says this is my virtual machine name web server. So we successfully been able to deploy the IIS web server from PowerShell. So this time let's do the same thing on the portal. So we'll come back here, virtual machines. So it means we need to create a new virtual machine here, which we'll call O2. So on the portal, instead of going to Cloud Shell for PowerShell, we'll come here and just click on create virtual machine. Use the same resource group, so RG Lab 09. And our virtual machine name, we'll call it VM0902 this time. East USA is fine. Availability option, no, it's fine. Image, we'll use Windows Server 2016 data center, which is exactly what we want. The size, we'll use the same size standard D2S V3. Copy this. For username, and we'll come back, copy this for our password. and we use the same password. And public inbound, so we want to allow RDP, allow selected port, so it will create it automatically for us. And we also want to allow HTTP. And next, and fine with this, next, and fine, no load balancing, next, review and create. So it gives us that information and we create. And now the web server, or let me say the virtual machine, has been created. So we're going to go to resource and we can see our virtual machine. So next we need to connect through RDP. So click on connect. But let's be sure that the network inbound route has been set in the first place. So we'll go to networking and we can see HTTP and RDP has been set. So go back to connect and we connect with RDP and we can see our IP address, public IP address created with port number. So we'll download the file, save, and let's go back to open that. So we can see for virtual machine 2, so select it and connect, and we'll do the same thing, use different account and use the username which we have here, and we use the password, and OK, and allow the credentials, yes. So it's going to deploy the RDP connection, and now we can see it's opening up the virtual machine. And now we're on our desktop, so let it load the manager. So if it does, then I'll just go to here and I'll see server manager, so I'll click on that to open. And now we can see we don't have IIS installed, so we need to go to add roles and features so that we can set up IIS. So click add roles and features, we'll go to next. We want role based or feature based installation, next. And now we can see our destination server, which is server from server pool, next. And now we need to select the web server IIS, so make sure we select that, and this is fine, include management tools, add features, and once that is selected, click next. Features, all this fine, next. And now for our role services, we need to make sure that we select IIS 6 management compatibility. So once that's selected, click next and we can say install. So give it time for the IIS installation to take place. And now we can see IIS has been fully installed, so we'll close. Let me show you something. If we click on this and we go to this, the default websites, and if we go to browse, it's going to open up our browser. But anyway, we can see now that our web server is fully deployed, and currently it's just showing us the default page. So let me close that and let me view that from the host machine. So I'll minimize this and we need to come back here, go back to overview, and let's copy the IP address just like we did for our first virtual machine, and I'll paste that, and we can see now that our web server is currently deployed, but we need to change this just like our first web server to show us this information content. So I'll go back to my guest machine, and that's this, and I'm going to go to that file where it's hosted in C drive and inetpub, and we'll go to www-root, and we can see this is the default page that is currently showing. So I'm going to instead create a folder, and I'm just going to put that as app, and I'm hiding that in there, and I'm going to create a new HTTP file. Yep, and I'm going to type that in there, this web server, and that's fine, and I'm going to save it as fine. So let me save it here in the original folder, save, and it's saved. So let's check that, and now we can see it is HTML document index. So creating a HTML document called index would make it the default file to be accessed by the web server. So let's go back and prove that. So we're going to reload this and see, and now it says this is the VM Lab 0902 web server. So similar to our first one. So we've successfully been able to create the IIS web server from the PowerShell and also from the Azure portal.